Hi, I'm Lisamarie Costabile for Inside the Studio with Greg Wurth, and today I'm here with three-time Grammy nominee and Emmy Award-winning bassist Philip Bynoe.
Hi, folks. Nice to see you.
So I just want to bring up that Philip and I've known Philip way before I met Greg, years back in Boston when you were playing with Farron, or Fahrenheit, Charlie Farron.
That's right.
And so tell us a little bit about your history in Boston and how you got to LA.
Well, I started, grew up in Boston, went to Berkeley, did that whole thing, didn't graduate, ran out of money pretty quickly, and then started playing in local cover bands and, wedding bands and all this stuff to be a working musician, doing some teaching on the side, trying to make it so that I was earning a living as a musician most of the time. During that course of the time, you end up doing construction and things like that just to be when you're growing up. But I got involved with Charlie Farron, who was another one of those. There are many artists in the world that have not achieved the kind of fame they should. And Charlie, for me, is he's one of them, one of the pure great songwriter, great vocalist, great guitarist, great showman. He did the Joe Perry project, and that really took off. And he had Fahrenheit, and they had Fool in Love and Lost in Loveland, and they started to climb the charts. And that snafu of the music business just got in the way, and that didn't work out for them. But anyways, back to the story. So I luckily got to audition for Charlie, and I went and auditioned for him and joined his band, and we made a couple of records and played around the Boston area. And Lisamarie, who was, as I say, I always joke with her, was maybe 16 at the time. I'm sure she might have been a little older than that, but might have had a fake ID to come into some shows.
Exactly.
She was a fan of Charlie's, and I was in the band, so I got to meet her before her acting and theatrical thing blew up.
Oh, right. Yeah, totally blew up. But I just want to bring up a point of Boston, and I've always tried to explain it to people, and Greg, it was such a tight community, close-knit community, especially in the music industry. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were times where I would always see Philip at certain barbecues, or you'd walk in and the whole band of Extreme was there, and, Brad Delp was barbecuing, and Ben Orr. I mean, it was just such a close-knit community, and once, all the musicians got together, it was always an amazing time. It was such a great time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For me, unlike New York and LA, Boston seemed to have like a roof over it. And that was a good thing and a bad thing, in the sense that what Lisa was just talking about. You could go, to the Salem Grill or someplace, and next thing you know, in walks, as she just said, Ben Orr. I was in a bass competition, and Ben Orr was one of the judges. I got to play with Brad Delp in a band called Beetlejuice, which
That's right, Beetlejuice. That was great.
Which, I mean, you wouldn't know. I mean, you probably wouldn't know it by listening to Brad, but he was such a McCartney fan. So they had this Beetlejuice band, and they were going to Florida, and the bass player they had wasn't able to do the show. So I got lucky and got to play with them. And, so just by being in that community, you would have opportunity to play with some, really famous people. Mm-hmm. I went to high school with Gary Sharon. I got to play with those guys a little bit here and there. And, so as Lisa was just saying, when you're in LA or in New York, though the people are around you, they're a little bit less attainable. But when you're in one town, everybody knows everybody.
Exactly. So going from the Berkeley days, did you know, because I know Steve Vai went to Berkeley, did you know Steve in the Berkeley days?
No, I only knew the legend.
Okay. All right.
I was a couple of years behind. There was a class, in his class there was himself, Kevin Eubanks, so many. There's all these people that had this, Victor Bailey. Many musicians who went on to have really established careers in music, and sort of like that first cast of Saturday Night Live, and then there was the second cast, and I was lucky enough to be in the second cast, so I didn't get to meet him there.
Okay, so your transition from Boston to LA, what was the big push for you to move here? Because I know a lot of the guys that you played with stayed in Boston. I mean, these are world-class musicians that were amazing. There's no reason why that they couldn't move on to maybe world touring like yourself.
I got lucky. I played with a musician named Mike Mangini, who's a very famous drummer who's now with Dream Theater. We played in a band called Rick Berlin back in the back in the 1500s, right after the Civil War. No, we played together in the 80s and 90s, and he came out to Los Angeles to record with Steve, who was, and again, you talk about the small town thing. Yeah. Jane, who was his ex-wife, did go to school with Steve. And they maintained contact, and she would occasionally tell Steve about this drummer that that she was dating that was a great musician and would be right up his alley and so forth and so on. And long story short, he came out to do the Fire Garden record, and he and Steve had such a great rapport that Steve was saying, "Well, I'm going to do this G3 tour and I'm going to put a band together." And I was lucky that Michael said, "Oh, I know a bass player you should hear," and so I got to come out and audition for it and managed to get it.
Yeah, that's great. I knew Mike too back
Yeah.
in the Boston days, Mike and Gary, and that was fun. But that's interesting. Very interesting story. So, like, the elephant in the room is what you're working on, the Steve Vai Passion Warfare 25th anniversary. Not only are you on the album, but you're also going out on a world tour.
Yeah.
So, do you want to talk about that?
It is quite an elephant.
Everyone's like, let's just get to the Passion Warfare project.
It's well, as you know now, Steve is out on Generation X with Nuno, Torsten, Zach, Yngwie, and himself, the 5 guitarists, and they're doing this wonderful U.S. tour. So I received an email from him last night, as a matter of fact, with kind of an outline of the set list and what he wants to do. So that was exciting for me because I'd been starting to prepare, and whenever I'm going to work with Steve, I always try and get as much of a head start on the thing before we get there, because with him in this show that he's creating, I hope I'm not going to give anything away. He's planning on doing, things with video screens, excuse me, and having musicians sit in via a video link and all these wonderful and crazy things he plans to do. So, and as most of his fans know, anytime Steve does something, it's never small. So it's going to be quite an undertaking. There'll be the backdrop will be changing from song to song, along with the band from song to song. There'll be artwork, all kinds of things. He's done plans to do things with, I'm not going to say any names because,
don't say
I'd hate to say, oh, well, Jesus is going to be there, and then he doesn't show up.
Right.
So
Greg always warns me, don't put that on social media.
So yeah, it's going to be a great show. We're planning, I think, 3 weeks of rehearsal, and she wants to keep the show a little bit short on the short side, so it'll be more entertaining. But it's going to be just jam packed with music, visual assault, and just craziness.
We're all excited about that. Now, talk a little bit about when Steve, what does he do? Does he call you? Hey, Philip, are you available? Come on over and lay some tracks for the what is that, Modern Primitive? Like, how did that work out?
Boy, I wish that was the case, that I just was sitting home having some tea and Steve had called me up. Hey, how you doing, buddy? But no, those of you that don't know Steve, he is one of those guys, I think that he takes his work ethic from his mentor, which was Frank Zappa, which was to work on everything all the time, all the time, all the time. So he'll email you and say, he'll email me and say, I'm thinking about doing this thing. Can you come by, and track bass for me? Of course, I get in the car and drive over there immediately. But it's not that casual of, oh, I'm doing whatever. While I'm driving over to record with him, he's working on 3 other things. So
yeah,
that's kind of how that works.
And is there any so bringing you up to the tour? Is there any sort of ritual or anything that you do before you go either into the studio or when you start a tour? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a lot of wear. I saw those dates for the tour. By the way, they're released. Yeah. Crazy. Like, how do you even prepare for that?
Well, I prepare, I guess, the same for all things. As I just said to you, I try and get a head start on the music and the material so that I can walk into rehearsal and have a very good idea as to at least what notes I'm going to be playing and what order they'll be in. That's the first thing. And then just trying to maintain good health throughout, through just in general, because if you're going to go out and grind like we're going to grind, the best thing you can do is make sure that you're prepared for getting on a plane every day or riding around a bus for 8 hours and then performing, 2 to 3 hours a night. So all the things that I'll do before are going to be learning the songs, preparing myself, eat right, get plenty of sleep, all the stuff your mom told you.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to ask you, back to a little bit about your personal life in the Boston days or when you were living in Boston. What made you leave Berkeley? A lot of people do. So to the fans or to the young kids, is going to a university for 4 years important if you want to study music? Or
Well, and now in the climate today, I would say yes, it is. The reason that I left school, which is the reason why a lot of people do, is financially. I didn't want to foresee myself getting that far into debt, going into a field that was not necessarily promising of income. There are, as you just mentioned, there are so many great musicians out there that are, some are just working regular day jobs just to make ends meet. While I was at Berkeley, I was playing in these cover bands, and in the '80s, you're playing cover bands, you're making $300-400 a week. I thought that I had, I don't need it. I made it. So, yeah, but the real thing that pulled me out of Berkeley was finance.
Right. Okay. And
to continue the point to the young people.
Okay.
Getting a degree as a musician is probably one of the more important things you can do. I know that I've continued to try and get myself back to school, because when you enter the workforce as a musician, if you go into the field of teaching, if you go into any kind of field you go into, the first thing they're going to ask you is not what kind of a great musician you are. They're going to want to look at your credentials and if you have a degree. That's just the simple truth.
So when you're not touring with Steve Vai or whatever, what are you doing?
I work at a music college, the LA College of Music in Pasadena. I'm in the bass department, obviously. That's why I brought my bass.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So this is gorgeous. Do you want to show the audience and
it's my primary bass when I'm playing with Steve. Funny you should mention him. It's a bongo 6-string. I love it. I have a couple of them. They really work well. It's a solid bass. For the other 6-string basses I've had have been on the heavy side. This one's rather light. And as you were talking about fatigue and touring, and because when we're out with Steve, we'll do. We were out on the Story of Light tour. We had almost a 3-hour show, and then we would do maybe an hour to hour and 15 minutes of sound check and recording, every day. So that's about 4 or 5 hours a day playing, and we would have almost a show every day because we didn't really have a vocalist. So Steve would we just go. We'd do 18 shows in a row, 7 shows in a row. And so, having the ability to have something that you can wear that's not going to pull you down or make you tired. Any advantage I can use to get myself to be standing up straight and feeling good, I'm going to go with. So that's one of the big things about this bass, is that even though it's a 6-string, it's still lightweight.
Mm-hmm. A little different than your first guitar?
Little, yeah.
Tell me about your first guitar.
My very, very first one?
How'd you get it?
Well, that's going to go into the history of Philip Bynoe, which is a great story. My father and brother, well, actually all my siblings, we all studied music at a young age. So my father and brother were both bassists as well. So my first bass was a Radio Shack realistic bass that came with an amp that I used to tell everybody was a Hohner because it was shaped like a Hohner. And, in Malden, there was my bass and maybe my bass and one other kid who had a bass. So who knew? That was the first bass. First guitar I had was I think that it was one of those ones in the bin where you have the claw come down and you win it.
Are you kidding me?
It was pretty bad, but I was a little kid, so it didn't matter.
That's cute. How old were you when you first picked up a bass?
I started studying cello around. This is the funny story. I think that I started around 6 or 7, and my mom. I have pictures of myself as a very small person playing it. So that's the story I've been going with. And then I started guitar when I was about 10, and then I had a bass in the house because both my father and brother had them, so I just played. And then as I became a teenager, in the 70s, which I'm willing to admit now, there was, in a small town, as I said, there was me who had a bass and an amp, and I was, because I had that, I was like the kid that had the ball. I had to be in everybody's band, so I got to play with a lot of people at a very young age just for the fact that, not necessarily that I wasn't that bad at it. I mean, I was all right, but having an amp and a bass gave me a lot of opportunity to play more than most.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So when you're not playing bass and touring, besides music, what are your hobbies? What do you do?
I'm a very big fan of yoga. I take Bikram yoga. I do that about 5 or 6 times a week, which is how I keep my girlish figure.
Mm-hmm. And your focus. That's great.
The other thing that I do is I do write children's music with a songwriter, this woman, Deb Snyder. And we have a whole 3 or 4 records of this band called PB and Deb. I know it's music related, but that's...
You just can't get it out of you.
Yeah, you think of your husband, all he does is, record things and use gear.
And talk about it.
Yeah. That's why you only have one kid. You got to get him off the subject. But
exactly.
Yeah. So Yeah, so I do that, and then my wife and I and some friends will get together, and we have this kind of fun recording that we do. That's not for anybody, but for me or for us to listen to and laugh about.
Well, I know what else you like. Hockey, the Bruins. You're from Beantown, you got to be a Bruins fan, right?
I am one of the diehard Bruins fans out here in California. I did buy a Kings jersey, and I begrudgingly wear it. But I still I'm still bleeding, what is it, black and gold. So.
Yeah, the Beantown pride. So is there anything else you want to share with the audience? You have so much going on with the Passion Warfare tour.
Yeah.
When do you start rehearsals?
We start rehearsals May 11th, for those of you with the calendar. So.
Yeah. Wow. And this tour, I think the end of May it starts. That's boom. Wow. Okay. Well, cool.
Steve gets back on the 9th. Again, the workaholic that he is, he gets back on the 9th. I guess he sleeps on the 10th, and then he goes to rehearsal the 11th.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a question for you. This Greg wanted me to ask you. The bass line. Any bass line that influenced you?
Oh, jeepers, there's so many.
Do you want to play one?
I'll happily play you
I don't know if it's going to sound great because we don't have it hooked up, but yeah, please.
But I can tell you some of the ones when I was growing up, of course. The theme from Barney Miller, every bass player has to know it.
Yeah.
That's one that you have to know if you're a bass player. It comes with the bass. And if you're a bass player of color, you learn. And I'm sitting next to a brick house, so why not play it?
Right, exactly.
And then when I was, before I went to Berkeley, a very good friend of mine turned me on to, said, if you're going to be a bass player, you got to listen to Stanley Clarke. So, now I'm rushing. But the School Days and all of his, wore the record player out, listening to, learning and listening to a lot of his stuff. He was one of the early bassists that really influenced me. Stanley, Jocko, Larry Graham, Louis Johnson. But the list goes on and on. For me and bass players, every year somebody comes out and is great. I mean, Billy, Stu, Victor. I call them on first name basis now because that's who I am. But
that's how he rolls.
But you listen to McCartney is one of the great innovators in bass. I can go on and on. John Paul Jones, John Deacon from Queen. There's so many great bass players in all different genres that have done such great work. I mean, and I'm going to give him a plug, but even Steve, who plays bass on a number of his things, much to my chagrin, he's quite a bass player himself too.
Cool. I know. Greg told me about that earlier.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that wraps it up. And you could check out Philip Bynoe on all social media outlets. Also, if you want to know the tour dates, go to vai.com. And thanks so much for joining us, Philip. Yay.
Thank you, Lisa. Bye-bye, world.
Bye-bye. This is Lisamarie Costabile with Philip Bynoe for Inside the Studio with Greg Wurth.
I wanted to mention that they actually do make a Philip Bynoe bass pick. A company called Strum & Comfort makes them. I'll hold up so you can see it. It says my name and everything. And they're a thumb pick because as a bass player using a pick, a lot of times I would have to, use a pick and then use my fingers. Normally I'd put the pick in my hand and then I'm holding the pick and using my fingers. But with this thing, it attaches to my thumb so I can just keep it on my thumb and then use it whenever I want to and use my fingers whenever I want to. And then